Hey guys, this is Blake. I'm here to review Paranormal Activity 2. Now with the first Paranormal Activity, it's a very polarizing film. You're either going to hate it or you're going to really like it. I really liked it. That movie creeped me out. I thought it was pretty scary. One of the scarier experiences that I've had in the last few years. But at the same time, it's the type of scary that's not going to work on everybody. In fact, it's an almost 100% subjective film. See, most movies, especially horror films, if they don't scare you, they still have other stuff to fall back on. Like, for example, The Shining has great cinematography, has great set designs, has great acting. So even if you aren't scared of it, you can at least admire those parts. Same with movies like The Changeling, Alien. And with The Changeling, it didn't scare me, but I admired it as a film. But with Paranormal Activity, it has to scare you. It has to creep you out in some way. Because it doesn't really have any of that. It's just, anybody could have filmed it. It doesn't have any noticeably good acting, noticeably good cinematography, but it's good enough to fit into what it's aiming for, which, like I said, is to be creepy. But its type of horror isn't going to work on everybody. If it doesn't scare you, it's going to bore the crap out of you, because it relies on very subtle noises to creep you out, like doors creaking. Now, that kind of stuff to me is really effective just because it lasts with you a lot longer after the movie registers. You hear your own door creaking, and it's like, oh, shit. I also loved how they framed the main scare sequences. You had the camera so you'd see the bed, and then you'd see the open door so you could see the hallway. So you never really knew where to look to see where the scare was going to come, and that always kept me on edge. So it was a love it or hate it. I'd still recommend the first one for sure if you are into, if you think the possibility of being scared intrigues you. With Paranormal Activity 2, I was very skeptical. I mean, how do you recreate that for better or worse? But it actually turned out, I thought, to be a pretty good sequel. Some people, I think, are incredibly harsh on it, but they always bring up good points when they are. In fact, just kind of a humbling moment, I thought I had this movie figured out. I figured I could paint out how, if you'll like it or not so perfectly. But then, I read a few people's reviews, and they completely blew that out of the water. So hopefully I'll give a good enough critique of it. It's always harder with these video reviews than it is written reviews. So first off, with the way it's trying to scare you, it's very similar to the first film, except it's a lot bigger, a lot more ambitious. There was a lot more money behind it, so you had cameras all throughout the house. It does take, I think, a lot longer to get going in some ways. I thought it was overall slower, but still it kind of had its own sense of dread about it. The scenes where nothing is happening, or you're always just like, okay, what's about to happen? What's about to happen? And even if you're disappointed when nothing happens, which I often was, the fact that the movie was, keeping my attention that way is still something. And I did think that the simplicity of the first one was more effective. I liked just how it was that pretty much in that one room. But this movie creates its own freaky way of creeping you out in the same way that did. It kind of sounds confusing. But, so if you thought the first one was scary, you should find this to be pretty scary. But if you didn't, you probably won't find this to be scary. You'll find it boring. In fact, I'd say even more boring, because I thought it had a slower pace. The first one kind of went gradually, but when it started going, it never really stopped. This one kind of has its moments where it'll go really slowly, then start, then stop again, then start. As for the characters, to be honest, this is one that I'm really not sure how to describe. I actually, in some ways, really didn't like the characters in the first one. Like Mika, I thought he was kind of a douchebag. But at the same time, I didn't want them to die. I was rooting for them up until the end, so it was kind of like they were flawed, but I still was rooting for them. In the case here, I also was hoping they'd get out of it, whether they do or not. I was rooting for them, and but they also just didn't feel quite as developed. But a lot of people thought they were more interesting and a lot more likable, so if Paranormal Activity bored you because you didn't like the characters, you might appreciate this more. But otherwise, if you like Paranormal Activity for its characters, this one kind of feels like a a little bit of a step down. But it's hard to do that because the first one was such an intimate story. It was these two people who were suffering from this poltergeist, and this one has a lot more characters, plus the characters from the first one, since this is technically a prequel. And they tie them both in really well. I thought in some ways they explained why they're using the cameras a little bit more. Like with Micah, like I said, my problem with him was even when stuff started to go wrong and it was obvious something was off, he kept filming, he got that freaking Ouija board, and even if you don't believe in any of that stuff, if that's freaking out your girlfriend so much, you just don't go that far. And I was just a little bothered by that, just to keep the plot going. Here, when they do stuff like that, it at least makes a little bit more sense, like the little girl, or the daughter, not a little girl, she's a teenager, she does a Ouija board scene too, but you could kind of understand why she's doing that. For one, she thinks it might be her mom's ghost that's talking to them. And, a kid you could see doing that. And then, like I said, the cameras, since it's mostly just, security cameras, there's no problem there. A few scenes, though, did feel kind of awkward. Like, I always was bothered when the father finally starts realizing that something is happening. For some reason, the daughter's filming it for no reason other than for exposition's sake. Or you need a scene that really bridges that. But for the most part, I was pleased. I think it handled the camera aspect better than most of these first-person mockumentary, lost footage type films. I did think the movie borrowed a little bit from other movies, though. Story-wise, at times it reminded me of The Believers with Martin Sheen. Like, just certain aspects of that movie. Then, at one point, this movie goes into complete wreck mode. But it was still a pretty effective scene. And I have a problem with the ending. And I'm going to have to spoil a few things there. Not explicitly, but indirectly. But I'll warn you when I do that. But I thought the whole ending was pointless. But still, I thought it was overall a very creepy movie. Just like the first one. I thought if you liked the first one, you should like this one. But if you didn't like the first one, I don't think you'll like this. But, you have to take every individual thing. Otherwise, you never really know with these types of movies. But I will say that I liked it. And if you want to read my full written review, just check the link in my description. I'm going to be implying spoilers in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, I did not like the ending. In the end, they end up pretty much passing... I can't even describe it. But pretty much the last 5 minutes just ends like such a conventional horror film. There's this big twist in the end which ties in the first and second one perfectly. And I think it should have just ended there. I thought that would have been far more chilling, but in a different kind of way that the first one presented. But here it just kind of becomes a redundant horror movie ending. It has to end like all the horror movies end these days. And, the final jump scare is so much a rip-off of the first film's ending, it's sad. It's like they're trying to do the same thing, but it just didn't work. I did like, though, how they kind of explain how the demon works. They don't even always explain it. They kind of let you figure it out for yourself. Like, for example, was it just me or did the demon seem to be adopting personalities of all the people it's trying to possess? Like in the first one, every time Katie gets frustrated with Micah, the demon starts getting more violent and angry. And I always thought it was weird how the demon throws Micah's body into the camera after the demon presumably had killed him, because you don't hear him struggling at all after the screaming stops. But it's almost like Katie doesn't like cameras, or especially after Micah's been kind of shoving it in her face, so she's getting all frustrated with that. So it's kind of like a take that to the camera, and then she does the same thing in the second one. And then, at times the demon just comes across like a little brat child. When you try to ignore it, it will slam all the cupboards, and that was a pretty cool scene too. And then it kind of takes a motherly aspect, like the mother in this movie. People always complained about why didn't he just take the baby when it pulls it out of the crib? Well, I was under the impression that the demon doesn't have enough power to do anything like that yet, but it was probably just playing around with the baby and put it back, like a mother would. And I thought that was a really interesting idea to have the movie explore. And that's pretty much it. See ya.